Hello, my darlings, and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new here, my name is Miranda, and I am the Enchantress of Avalon. So, for today's video, I thought it would be fun to go through my entire tarot deck collection. Now, this is only tarot decks. I actually have a ton of oracle decks, and those would be a video, maybe even multiple videos in and of themselves, because I actually collect way more oracles because I try to limit myself to only a few tarot decks every year. But oracles, I tend to be like, well, this one has its own theme, and I have a bit of a problem with collecting things. Anyway, these decks have been collected over the last 9 years, so nearly a decade, since I have been reading tarot and oracle. And tarot was my first magical tool and spiritual tool when I started walking my spiritual path. And I think that's true of a lot of us. Some people might have a wand was their first tool, or their first tool was a crystal ball, or their first tool was, an athame or something. For me, my first tool, and the one that has never left me, I've always used it, is tarot. Oracle too, but tarot was the beginning, and tarot is something I always come back to. I work with tarot every single day. And obviously I do also offer tarot and oracle card reading services on my website. So that's always linked in the description down below if you're interested. Now, I'm going to start. I have it broken up to decks that I didn't really jive with, decks that only worked well for reading for other people, and there's overlap there. My decks that are novelty decks, and then the decks that have really made an impact on my life. And let's begin. So the first deck I'm going to discuss, and it's a deck I did not jive with, may shock some, may not shock anyone at all, I don't know, but it is the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. It is, that staple deck. It's most people's first. It was actually my first as well. I figured I would go with, one of the most iconic decks, the first thing I was purchasing. As you can see, I tried really hard to love this deck. I carried it around with me for months and months. Even after I got the deck, about a month after this, I got my first deck that made a major impact on me, and I'll talk about that later in the video. But this deck just is not for me. As much as I wanted to love this deck, and I do appreciate Pamela Coleman Smith so much, the history of the deck, I think, really gets in my head, and I can't. Although there was a time period when my husband loved getting readings with this deck, but I haven't used this deck in years. I keep it as a memory, and I also keep it as, this was the original deck, and yeah, it was just not for me. So if the Rider-Waite-Smith does not resonate with you, if you don't gravitate towards it, do not feel bad, because it's just not for everyone, and it's definitely not for me. The next deck that I wanted so badly to love, but just was not for me, was the Golden Tarot by Kat Black. And I think it's because this deck, out of every deck I own, feels the most like just a Rider-Waite-Smith deck. It is a medieval themed deck, and I thought that I'd love it because I'm obsessed with the medieval stuff. And it has all this beautiful medieval artwork on it. And I love the way it opens at the top. It has gilt edges. It's a beautiful deck. But it feels much too similar to the Rider-Waite. It literally, when I read with this deck, feels almost identical to reading with the Rider-Waite deck, except this has medieval paintings on it. And again, I did read for my husband with this deck a lot for a while. It's just not one I go to pull out. So that's how it is. The third deck that I never resonated with may surprise a lot of people, and it's because it's a fairy tarot deck. This one is by Radley Valentine. I think my issue with this was my first fairy themed tarot, by the way. My issue was this deck just only does love and light. It is very, very heavy into only happy thoughts, only good stuff. And fairy isn't just love and light. Fairy is a realm of the dead, and it's just, you get none of that. You get only the happy, and it bothered me. And because of that, I could never really jive with this deck. I've tried reading with it. It does not work for me. The next deck that just does not work for me, it does not jive with me. And what I have done is I do like the cards, so I'll use them as like altar decorations and different things, but I cannot use this deck to use this deck, is the Everyday Witch Tarot by Deborah Blake. Now, I appreciate Deborah Blake for what she does, but it's much more Wiccan leaning than anything I do. I am not a Wiccan, never have been. And this is too modern for me. I think that my main complaint with this is it feels very modern because it is the Everyday Witch. It doesn't have that tapping into the past or tapping into the wild energy that I really would appreciate. So yeah, it's just not a favorite. Some of the card artwork though is absolutely gorgeous. Well, all the card artwork is beautiful, but some of them are just absolutely mind-bogglingly gorgeous. Just not for me. The next deck is a deck that I've had. This is the prime one where I can read for other people with it, but I cannot read for myself with it at all, ever. And I'm not one of those people who says I can't read for myself. I've always been able to read for myself. I read for other people a lot too, but I've always been able to read for myself. I do every single morning. This deck, no matter how much I try, I can't read for myself. It is the Shadowscapes Tarot by Stephanie Pumanlaw. I do not know if I'm pronouncing that right. I do apologize. It is a gorgeous fairy-inspired tarot deck. The imagery is absolutely mind-bending, and it's lovely. Even the backs of the cards are really pretty. They look like this. Like, everything about this deck is really gorgeous. And I've given some really great readings for other people with it. But I did for a while offer this as one of the decks that I would use on my website, but I've since ceased offering this particular deck. It's great for reading for other people. It is horrible for reading for myself. That's why it's kind of in the bottom here. Not any fault of the deck itself. I can't read for myself with it, and that presents issues. Now, I have two decks that are novelty decks. The first is the Casanova Tarot. And this is, yes, a novelty deck, and yes, also an erotic deck. Because being a woman very in tune with sacred sexuality, I had to have an erotic deck, and I decided to go with the Casanova Tarot. I love history, and I do love Casanova and that whole era, so I went with it. It is a really fun deck, and it actually does give quite good readings, but, you know, it's an erotic tarot. It's a novelty thing. It's not something you're going to pull out all the time, but it's great for what it is. The next deck was a gift last Yuletide from my best friend Daisy, and it is the Hocus Pocus Tarot, and it's incredible. It is a great deck. I did offer readings with it for Samhain, the whole Season of the Witch sale I was doing this year as a special. It's a great deck, and it does give really, really good readings, and it's perfect for fans of the movie. But it is a novelty deck, and it's not something I'm going to go and pull out just because. It's not like one of these decks that I would never want to use, and it's not like the Casanova Tarot where it's very specific circumstances. It's just a deck that's great for like Samhain and parties associated with like having a Halloween party. It's really fun, but it's not my go-to deck if I had any. But what are my go-to decks? Well, I'm going to talk about the decks that have had a huge impact on me. And I don't think I mentioned this, but I have a total of 13 decks here. I actually did just order another deck, so I will be having 14 decks very soon. But right now it's 13, and it felt like, okay, I can make a video with this. Plus 13 is such a magical number. Okay, so the first deck that really impacted me, it was my second deck that I bought, but the first deck that I regularly used after the Rider-Waite, of course. It is the Joie de Vivre Tarot by Paulina Cassidy. I absolutely love the artwork on this deck. It feels very whimsical, and it's very Alice in Wonderland-ish. I gravitated towards it because it felt like Alice in Wonderland to me, even though there are Alice in Wonderland themed decks that I don't own. But I, of course, love that story, so loved this. I've had this deck for like 9 years, as I said, and when I was learning tarot, this was the deck I really learned on, because the Rider-Waite deck the Rider-Waite did not capture me. So when I was learning on this deck. When I was meditating with the cards for the first time, when I was doing writing on each of the cards to get into, really get into knowledge of them and get to know them, it was all with this deck. So I literally have just pages of writing for each of the cards. And yeah, I don't really use it anymore very much, but I will always keep it because this was the deck I learned on. So that was like my tutelage right there. Now, the next deck that made a huge impact on me was, of course, the Arthurian Tarot by by John and Kathleen Matthews. And this deck is incredible. The Hallow Quest, which is included in the guidebook for this deck, is one of the greatest experiences of tarot work I've ever had. It's over a year of deep immersion daily doing this work, and it's what really cemented a daily practice of not just daily card pulls, which I'd been doing from the beginning, but daily journaling along with my actual cards. Before I was just pulling cards and not writing anything down. This is what got me into writing daily about all the tarot work I was doing. And it's a great deck. And as a, priestess of Morgan Le Fay, of course, I had to have this when I discovered it. And I'm so glad because it has had such a huge impact on my life. Next, I'm going to talk about the Llewellyn Tarot, which is one that I actually do offer on my website to do readings with. It's by Anna Marie Ferguson, who also did do her own Arthurian Tarot called Legend the Arthurian Tarot. Don't own it. Wish I did. It's out of print. It's beautiful, all based on the Mabinogion, so it ties perfectly into my practice. After that, we have the Wildwood Tarot, the other tarot that I offer readings with on my website. It is by Mark Ryan and John Matthews, and it's a woodland, very magical, very Celtic fairy deck. I mean, I feel it's fairy technically, but it really feels that. And if you notice, the decks that I drive with are Celtic and fairy because that is my practice. The next deck that is the greatest fairy tarot I've ever had is the Tarot of the Hidden Realm by Julia Jeffrey. It is gorgeous, and I do readings for my husband with this deck a lot now because after I got past the point where I was deep diving in the deck and only reading for myself, which I usually do in the beginning with every deck, I started reading for him, and he loves this deck. This is his favorite deck ever for doing readings, and it's just, it feels like walking in a fairy realm, and I love it for that. Then my final deck, the deck that I'm currently working with exclusively for personal spiritual development and daily tarot readings, is the Crow Tarot by MJ Cullinane. I'm not sure how you say her last name, but it is a gorgeous deck. It is a favorite amongst a lot of tarot readers that I've begun to talk to. I've realized this is a big favorite deck. And again, it's a very Morgana feeling deck because Morgan Le Fay's sacred animal is the crow or the raven. And this is all ravens, and it's all crows. It's all crows. They're so pretty. And you see them in the cutest little situations ever. And I just have such love for this deck. And it's always going to be a favorite of mine. And it has that very Avalon feel to me and very Celtic feel because of crows being so important and ravens being so important in fairy lore, in Celtic spirituality, and connected to Avalon, of course. As the Enchantress of Avalon, I would love this deck. So I do hope everyone has enjoyed this little tour through the 13 tarot decks I currently own with my thoughts on each deck. And if you have enjoyed it, please do like, comment, subscribe, and check out my blog, whiteroseofavalon.life, for even more content. And I hope you all have a very, very happy week and a very magical week. Bye now.